Hi there everyone. In this episode we'll be going through some collectibles related to the early history of the space program. First up we've got Sputnik, which was the first ever human-built satellite. It wasn't the absolute first human-built object to enter space, but it was the first one to actually orbit the Earth. And the launch of Sputnik is regarded by many to be the beginning of the space race, the competition between the Soviet Union and the Americans to get further ahead in space technology. And it very much was a competition between those two nations. The reason their space programs ended up getting so much money from the government to further their work was because both nations were trying to outdo each other to show the world who the better and more advanced country was. This is a commemorative coin. These were issued by the Perth Mint in 2007 to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Sputnik. And that's what Sputnik looked like. In the video I'll be focusing on quite a lot of reading materials, so if you want to read any of this, just pause the video. Here's a New York Times article. And a cool little gimmick they had with these coins was that the earth and outer side pieces are separate, and if you pinch the middle you can actually spin it, so it looks like the satellite is orbiting Earth. This one's a bit stuck, I can't spin it all the way around. Next up we've got some stuff related to the Russian cosmonauts. In 1961, the Soviet Union launched the first ever manned spaceflight, and Yuri Gagarin became the first ever human to enter space. He became the first astronaut, or cosmonaut as the Russian space program would call them. And it very much was a point of pride for the Russians that they'd succeeded in beating the Americans in the first two major steps in the space program, not only launching the first satellite, but also launching the first ever human into space. First up I've got some photocopies of newspapers. Here's a Russian newspaper. Here's an American paper. Here's another one of those coins. This one spins a lot better. Got this very nice little Soviet pin. I found this in an antique store in Hahndorf last year. And here we've got a Russian coin from around that era. This is 50 kopecks, or half a ruble. 1964, so this is 3 years after Vostok 1. Got the hammer and sickle on it. Here's an Australian headline. And here's a very nice group photo of the cosmonauts. Alexei Leonov, a few years later, would become the first person to perform a spacewalk. Here's a news article about him. Valentina Tereshkova, a couple of years after Gagarin's flight, she would become the first woman to go into space. She's also the last surviving Vostok cosmonaut, the only one that's still alive. I wrote astronaut there, it's meant to say cosmonaut, so just ignore that little typo. This piece here is a very interesting one. From what I can tell, this series of magazines was printed and sold outside of the Soviet Union for people in other countries that were interested in what was going on there, or people outside of the Soviet Union who still supported it, which there was quite a lot of back then. And this one, issue 136, was done to celebrate Gagarin's spaceflight. Of course, when Gagarin returned, he instantly became pretty much the most famous man in the world. Big parade they held in his honor in Moscow. There he is with Nikita Khrushchev. Huge parade they held. Everyone came out to get a glimpse of him. It's full of messages of congratulation from people in other countries, a lot of them leaders. Here's an interesting one from Kim Il-sung, the original leader of North Korea and Kim Jong-un's grandfather. Here's some more of the celebrations that were held. Some more messages of congratulation from world leaders. And there's one from JFK, and although he did issue this message when Gagarin went on his world tour, America didn't actually allow him to visit, so a bit of a sore loser moment on the Americans' part. These pages here contain some really nice photos from Gagarin's earlier years before he was a cosmonaut. And these people are the Mercury 7. They were the astronauts of the first ever American manned spaceflight program. This is The Right Stuff. It's a very good movie they made about the Mercury 7, if you're interested in learning more. And these things here are souvenir pins that were made to celebrate their flights. Alan Shepard was the first American to go into space. John Glenn was the third Mercury astronaut to go into space, and he was the first to actually orbit the Earth. Alan Shepard and Gus Grissom's flights, they did go into space, but they did what's known as a suborbital flight. You might remember a little while ago when Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson went into space. They did the same thing. They performed a suborbital flight, which is where you do reach space, but you don't actually orbit the Earth. You just go up and then come straight back down again. Alan Shepard and Gus Grissom both performed suborbital flights during the Mercury program. And then Glenn, he was the third one to go in, and he was the first American to actually perform full orbits of the Earth. And then Scott Carpenter went after him. Then Wally Schirra went, and finally Gordon Cooper. And he's the first person ever to actually go to sleep in space. And he also fell asleep in the capsule on the launch pad while waiting for the launch to start, because I guess he just got so bored waiting for everyone to get set up. And for quite a while, he was the last American to travel into space alone. There wasn't another American solo space flight until 2004, when Brian Binney went into space on a private mission. Wally Schirra went on to fly on both the Gemini and Apollo missions. He's the only astronaut to have been on all 3 programs. And Deke Slayton was also supposed to go into space during the Mercury program, but his flight had to be cancelled when he developed some minor heart problems, though he did get cleared a few years later, and in 1975 he did get to fly into space on a different mission. Alan Shepard went on to become the 5th person to walk on the moon aboard Apollo 14, and he also briefly played a game of golf while he was on the moon, and he was the oldest of the moonwalkers. When he walked on the moon, he was 47 years old. And this here is a Kennedy silver $50. These were minted in honor of President John F. Kennedy after he was assassinated in 1963. And although he wasn't actually an astronaut, he was very much a big part of the space program. It was him that challenged NASA to send a man to the moon. He pushed for the government to grant NASA the funding that it needed to develop the technology to send people into space and later to the moon, though he never ended up living to see the rest of the space program. Now here we've got an antique Australian Sun newspaper from the day of the first moonwalk. Here's some photocopies from inside the paper. There's Neil Armstrong's wife, Janet. Here's another nice souvenir pin. This was done for the moon landing. This coin was done for the 35th anniversary. Here's a cute photo of Buzz Aldrin with Buzz Lightyear. He was who the character was named after. And here's a souvenir magazine from the Herald Sun. There's the rest of the astronauts' wives. There's Joan Aldrin and Patricia Collins. And here's some profiles of the astronauts themselves. And here's a nice photo of Neil Armstrong speaking to his son while he's in quarantine. With the first moonwalkers, when they got back, they immediately were put into quarantine because they weren't sure if they would be carrying back any harmful bacteria from the moon. Only the crews of the first 3 missions had to quarantine. The crews of Apollo 15, 16 and 17 didn't need to quarantine, presumably because they knew by then that they didn't need to worry about bacteria. Here's another photocopy from inside the paper. And there's the President, Richard Nixon, talking to the astronauts from the White House. And this is from a newspaper that was released for the 50th anniversary of the first moon landing. These are the rest of the moonwalkers. For the last 3 missions, they drove cars on the moon, lunar rovers.